Hi, Max. Just want to answer the question about the this whole bilingual and multilingual question about do you translate or not before you speak. Um, and this is a really good psycholinguistic question. And yeah, I'm a psycholinguist. I'm a sociolinguist and a psycholinguist. And psycholinguistics is basically psycholinguistics is first language acquisition and second language acquisition. First language is your mother tongue. And second language acquisition is learning other languages and acquiring other languages. And I'm not going to try to make the distinction out of that right here, but there are differences. Okay. Um, so for me, um, for the language that I speak well enough. Okay. To be able to do well. Um, so I'll start with so English is my English American English is my mother tongue. And I did grow up part of my childhood in Minnesota. Minnesota, yes, I say Snota, because there's lots of snow. And then from age 10 on in Oregon on the West Coast until about age 23, and I moved to France. Okay. Um, that kind of gives you the idea of about half my life, 23 years in the United States. And then I lived another 4 years again in the United States during the past 30 years. But so, so, um, so about half my life and half my life, in two different countries. Um, the the So French. I, I'm not gonna discount the fact that I learned French when I was 13. French and Spanish like a first year, like seventh grade, junior high school kind of class. That was it. That I retook. I started again in 10th grade, so about age 15 or 16, and I did take French one, two, and three in high school. Um, but there's a certain level you can get to, and but then I did a second bachelor's degree in French. Okay, and that was 1 year. I did it in 1 year. I actually did over a period of 2 years, but I had to finish another degree and I had to take a bunch of French courses. Then I took a full summer. I took a summer immersion class in the summer. Actually, out offsite. It was not. It was actually all the time. You lived in French for the whole summer. And then the full year, I did a second bachelor's degree with all my 400 and 500 level classes for 1 year to get a second bachelor's degree. So it was 8 hours a day in French, advanced French. Okay, so that's pretty intense, and that's all written and spoken and literature and writing everything in French. And then moved to France, and I did worked in a summer camp as a summer camp counselor. You're taking kids all the time, and then I lived another year, and I from my on I was basically a C2 level. So and I had taken even an academic quiz, or one of my previous teachers, French teacher, had been she'd been she was a language evaluator, and during that year that I was doing my second bachelor's degree, we went through and she did a thing, and she just says, yeah, you're just the top, so it's about that point. So about 23 years old. Okay, when I so there's a period of like a couple of periods of there, after 20, a couple of years before in high school, but really after the 20 years level. So, but I had been, I had taken early on. I was able to read in French, when I was in high school. Um, and then I've lived half my life in French at home. Um, and then when the kids came, I spoke in English at home with the kids. So it's linguistic gymnastics. Um, so that's French. Um, Now I will say that I have gone through the issue of losing my English because I spent so much time in French that I did that. And there are times actually where I'll be actually speaking in English with my family, my extended family. I go back to the States or on the phone, and I'll have some kind of memory lapses of words because I don't use them in English anymore. I just don't use them in English because they're just so. Because I use common words around the house and stuff in French, kind of events. Um, so that has caused there I'll have holes and I'll have to kind of have I'll actually translate back. I'll think of it in French and then I'll translate it back into English. Yes, I do translate on those certain kinds of cases. Or if there's little idioms that are just coming to me in French, like because I use it so often, um, that I'll have to think about it in French and I'll have to do a little switch and actually translate it back in English. it's not all that happen. I'm not right now. I'm not thinking French and translating French English. I'm just speaking English. But there are times that there's little phrases, the inex fit sentences that happen. There are certain words that are very uncommon. I haven't used them for like 30 years. That kind of thing. So I have to conceptualize it, trying to think in my mind, what is the word, the situation where I've used it, try to remember what it was, and that kind of thing. That happens. For Spanish, now see for Haitian Creole, for the different Creole languages, because I do speak several different Creole languages, which are all pretty close. They're all mutual intelligible dialects, but they are different. And I do have different types of certain words. So I will sometimes do I'll actually be sometimes thinking in French and then kind of adapting it. So can be a translation process, but it's actually happening from a different language and not from my mother tongue, this is psycholinguistics' interesting thing, because something you think you're going to think in your mother tongue and then you're going to translate in the other language. No, I'm actually thinking in my next language, and I'm using that language as a springboard for other ones that are similar, right? So, so when I speak Spanish, it's the same thing. I will actually, as much as I can that I know for Spanish, I'll do it in Spanish directly. But then when I get stuck, I'll actually use the French, and then it'll come in Spanish. So yeah, the translation can be used, depending what languages, and if it's like your, L3, L4, whatever. So there are lots of cases where the second language that was learned later in life was later in life. It wasn't too late, but it was high school, early college years, becomes the springboard. It becomes the pivot for other languages. This can happen, and it does. And it does happen for me. And when I'm learning like Swahili, I did learn it enough to be able to do it immersed for a certain period of time. And I'll do that while learning in Swahili, but I won't be using other languages because it's a different grammar. So I'll do that differently. For German, it kind of depends. German isn't good enough. But I'm kind of playing linguistic rules there. So for me, it was just the first thing I would do with German is German. I learned. I mean, I was able to do little things and that kind of things. But I actually took German when I was just several years ago. I actually studied it for the first time, but they made me jump a year because they just saw how fast I got it. So they made me work at it. So I took a lot of them. I was 50 years old, so I was just I knew enough of it to get myself into trouble and get myself out of trouble, right? So. But I just bought all the different methods you can, and just immediately I took a train 4 hours a day and was just listening to it, and so it depends on what I'm trying to say, and anyhow I will kind of actually different languages to actually springboard off and pivot to be able to do it. It depends, so there's all different levels, okay, but I do notice for my children. Who have been brought up. My children have two boys have been brought up hearing English and French at home in parallel. One person, one language. One parent, one language. And French is their dominant language. They're in France. We did not focus to have them learn reading at the beginning, and one of my sons is dyslexic, so we learned that by about 3 or 4. So that's not too heavy, but it's just enough to be a struggle. So we would not focus on making them learn to read at all. We just screen time. All screen time had to be, and all subtitles and everything, and all screen had to be in English. So they had a lot of screen time. All that time was that. So I've watched them how they done it. And as a linguist, this has really interested me, how they acquire the language, because they're acquiring it, they're not learning it. So that's the distinction I make when they're on the acquisition. So they're acquiring a second mother tongue, but the mother tongue is not a dominant one. And so they're only using it passively, and it mainly for input. It's not so much for production. So I've been watching that and seeing how they do it. And it's really because we made them always do all the screen time, whether it be TV, cassettes, videos, whatever, the video cassettes or whatever, when they were children, DVDs, CDs, all that. DVDs had all films and everything had to be in English if it existed in English. So all Disney stuff was always in English. It was only like with some, oddball French film or something that was, just some kind of, some specific thing that was only available in French. That we'd do it for French, but all the time they'd watch on trips and cars and stuff, always in English. Though French was the home language that we spoke at home, and they always get the input in English from me. So, and I've seen that they now as teenagers, they're in their 16 to 19-year-old range. We see that I'm seeing that they are watching YouTube more, and they will look up. One of them will look up English first. He won't look up the French, but they both know that they can go look up the English and they can understand it completely. So I've been kind of watching that and see if they do it, but they don't produce. They don't try to speak, but they can totally understand everything. So that there's a bit of that too that you have to take into play. Is what does bilingual mean? I think that is a very fuzzy term. I think that's extremely. I think I've written about it a lot about the whole psycholinguistics and aspects of like psychological aspects of language learning and acquisition and all that. Just because my degrees are in linguistics, so with a focus on sociolinguistics and psycholinguistics. So there's a lot of that involved, and in analyzing how children were learning and all that, a bit. And so it's kind of depends. And so I've just been watching them and seeing how they do it. And each person's individually, of course. There are no one rule. And then you have to do with the two that I see that one of my sons, who's the one that speaks it better, because he's using it actually. He's not the dyslexic one. The dyslexic one is that's tough because he doesn't want to read. So that's kind of that comes into play a lot. Whereas the other one, he likes to read a lot. So he's just constantly devouring books and whatever. It just so it he will pick up on little things. And he's in tune to these little things, and he takes English class. His teacher will actually ask him for what the words are in English, and the French teacher, right, for the English class. So she'll ask him what his feeling about the word is, if he feels of it, and he'll be able to see it from English. So I think that this whole translation thing, it kind of depends. It depends on how early. There are a few things in a lot of the academic studies, okay, about this, in linguistics and psycholinguistics specifically. There's a lot of research been done. I mean, I don't want to pull out all my stuff when I taught the psycholinguistics class, because I did teach a psycholinguistics class and sociolinguistics class on top of all the other linguistics classes too for intro. I taught it in the university. And there are a number of studies. You can read a lot from Joshua Fishman. He's got some good stuff. And there are plenty of things from folks in Canada. There's been a lot done on that. A lot of research, off the top of my head here. I'm digging back in my memory a long time, 2 or 3 decades from, I'm the whole thing of code switching and code mixing. There are lots of books about this, and I don't want to start making a bibliography here in the video, but it really depends on the situation, and it depends on the social context and the sociological aspects, the sociolinguistic aspects, and the sociolect that's involved, and all that, and the environment, and how language choice and all that is made, at the individual level and the community level. This all comes to play. And we come in what country maybe it's. So we got Stefan will indicate from having been in a multilingual culture from the reading community. Swiss folks are this kind of normal, because you got four official languages. There are mainly 3 that are used, and add English to that. So that totally happens. Whereas if you tend to have cultures that are monolingually chauvinistic, let's say it that way, that will cause another thing where they won't want to reach out. Now, some of the interesting you'll see about some of the cultures I've done some because of the Creole language stuff that I've done, and this pulls back into history, and his socio-historical stuff is really interesting to look at. Is why were um, why were there some of the cultures that did not create Creole languages, but they were very marine. They did a lot of traveling, and they were very adventurous. There were port countries, and the port countries were the Netherlands and Portugal. So this is really interesting to see that they were adventurous. They go out, they do make trips and stuff. Lots of the Portuguese and the Dutch, but they didn't set up that many Creole. They didn't set up that many colonies. If you see it, I mean, very few. So they did not colonize so much. I'm not saying they didn't at all, because you got South Africa, but there are some kind of situations there. But you've got you're gonna get very little in Suriname and that kind of stuff for Dutch, but not as much as like French and Spanish did. Okay, but you've got other situations where like Portuguese, you're gonna find very few Portuguese-speaking countries. Four in Africa, four Lusophone countries, and then Brazil. So that's kind of the extent of that. Um, and that kind of points out, whereas you've got like French and English, you've got lots of colonies. So there was there was that whole colonization thing, that aspect that fits into it. And this is interesting to see, to compare with the language that exists, that there were there the how those cultures or those nations or the people that were going out and doing business, that they weren't trying to focus on creating colonies. Um, so that affects kind of the language cultural and language acquisition too. And I think there's a bit of that. That's some really interesting stuff to dig into, on a side point, because that's a different approach to forcing language and stuff onto other people, um, that the French and the English did, in the colonization period. Whereas the Dutch and the Portuguese didn't as much at all. I mean, not as much. Um, Very different approach, and so this affects how those countries themselves are more adapted. You'll notice that the Portuguese and the English, or the Portuguese and the Dutch, in general, they speak English pretty well because they pick up the trade language of the day. They will pick it up. This is interesting compared to the other languages that were dominating. So this is a really interesting thing. I've always noticed that the Dutch speak very English very, very well, and so do the Portuguese, at a young age, because they're watching the films and stuff. They're watching things and they're doing this. Whereas you'll see that other countries that are more dominating and have more economic power and are not port countries, they're more inland countries. You'll see that they are not. Um, they're more focused on their own language, like French, Spanish, German. So they're not affected by, but they're not in the port. Okay, I'm not going to Hamburg. I'm not going to talk about being in the port. I mean, it's kind of a minor thing, but port countries, they will actually the fact that they're ventures, they're taking the trade language. A very interesting thing to look at, and that affects how people perceive language of learning too. So that will affect how they want to learn a language as much as they want to be adventurous. So that comes to play of the folks from Netherlands can be more open to learning languages and do it well because of this socio-historical fact, this kind of past, which you don't find elsewhere. So I think a lot of these things are to come into play. This is, again, there's no one size fits all. A lot of this to do, and a lot of things that should be considered when you're looking at these things. A lot of this comes in language survey work. There are lots of language surveys that have been done, and survey work of historical things. And I don't want to get into like the whole 1975 with all the dialect survey kind of approach, and don't want to go into that here. This is not the place to do it, but there are some things on language approach to learning and that, and there's plenty of that. So hope this helps to give you a little bit of information, just my own personal stuff that you're asking for, but give a little bit of other stuff on the psycholinguistic side too, and some books that are available out there. Suzanne Romain as well was another one. I was trying to think of her name. So Suzanne. So I mentioned Joshua Fishman. He's got some. Suzanne Romain, Romaine, she's at Oxford. She's written a few books that are kind of been uh, widely cited and stuff on the whole, you know, language acquisition stuff. So she's another good resource for that, and there are lots of others. So, but you'd have to go. I have to go back and look at my doctoral thesis and start digging into all the names of the things off the head. But this is the ones I can get off the top of my head without looking at anything and no internet searching while I'm doing it. I'm not Googling, so I'm just kind of trying to remember what it is from going back, about I don't know, 2-3 decades ago from my doctoral research on the code switching, code mixing, all those kind of things. So hope that helps. Let me know, and glad to be able to help a little bit. Thanks. Bye.